Hi there, I've been asked to do another video following on from the first one where we looked at how best to try and manage your mental health during the current COVID crisis. And we're week 5 now into lockdown, and I know some of you have been relishing the slower pace of life, and the good weather of course has helped. But many of you, I think, probably have been finding it quite difficult. And I think Stephen Hamill had mentioned there's 70 plus frontline workers in Glenabbey, and your life will have become much more stressful. Some of you be worried about your job and your business, and for some the pace of life has just slowed down far too much and you're feeling quite isolated and lonely. There was a study published earlier in the year in a medical journal, and it looked at the consequences for people who had been under quarantine for different reasons and for different periods of time. But there was a common theme throughout it, and that was people experiencing low mood and irritability and of course anxiety. And a number of emotions we're just not going to be able to avoid, and the extent of these will depend very much on your circumstances and your nature and your usual way of managing these things. And suppressing your emotions isn't all bad. It can be helpful sometimes, but if that's the only way you manage them, then you could be storing up some problems for yourself in the future. So I think it might be quite useful just to take a bit of time to look at some of these things. I'm sure we've all experienced a bit of anxiety over the past while. So for example, if you're heading off to the supermarket, you might start to feel a wee bit more on edge, feel the heart beating a bit quicker, some butterflies in your tummy, and your thoughts might be running away with themselves. What if I touch something? What if I get it? And that anxiety can be helpful because it means you are going to be more alert when you're in the supermarket. You're less likely to bump into someone, touch something that you shouldn't touch. So it can be a good thing. And some of the anxiety will also be normal and again useful. It will help you identify your worries and enable you to mull them over and come up with some ways to manage it and just simply think it through. Some of you will be able to do that yourself quite easily, and others may need a bit of help with a friend to do that. I've spent some time talking to people this week and trying to help them put things into perspective, and that's always useful and helpful. But it can become more problematic if it's the physical feelings of anxiety are more pervasive and you're really not settling with help from chatting to a friend or mulling things over yourself, and your thoughts can be quite overwhelming and you're really struggling to rein them in. There's a lot of good help out there, a lot of self-help resources that I quite often direct people to. A good app is called Headspace. Mind.org.uk has some really good helpful ways of managing anxiety, as does NHS Inform, which is the Scottish NHS website. And what they look at is ways to manage your physical symptoms of anxiety, but also your thinking processes. But if you find those things are not helpful, it may be time where you need to then access some help, and I'm sure a friend or pastoral care workers or your GP will be able to kind of signpost you to the right places and the help that you need. The other thing is low mood, and I know that conversations are now starting to turn to what people are missing and what people are looking forward to when this all ends. There have been a number of losses for everybody. Some of them will be small and temporary, and some of them have a greater impact on people. Again, I think it's pretty normal to have periods lasting a day, 2-3 days where you may be just feeling a bit lower, and some of those things that we talked about in the previous video have slipped a bit. That you're struggling to get up in the morning a bit, you may be going to bed later, that structure has slipped somewhat, diet has slipped a bit, you may be drinking more alcohol than you should, and just not connecting as much with people, not exercising the way you had been. And that's pretty normal, and it can happen for a day or two, but it's good to take a step back and think about those things and try and put them in place again if you're finding the mood slipping a bit. One of the things I have loved watching is some of the clips that people have been putting up of things that they are thankful for in these current circumstances. And sometimes that's a good way to shift our thinking from a lot of the negative into looking at what we actually have. But having said that, there are times again where it's not easy to do that and those things aren't helpful for you. And if those things are not helping and you're finding your mood is persistently low for a couple of weeks, your sleep's very disturbed, your appetite's disturbed, you're really not getting enjoyment from anything or looking forward to anything, or sometimes your mood can become more hopeless and you start to think very negatively about life and maybe some thoughts of not wanting really to be here anymore, and that's the time that you would need to reach out to someone. Again, it could be somebody from pastoral care, it could be asking a friend to help direct you, or your GP, or some of the phone organisations like Lifeline and things like that can be very, very helpful. Irritability is another issue. I found my daughter googling cabin fever last week when there was a mild moment of irritability in our house. Thankfully it hasn't been happening too often. But again, I think we've all probably experienced or been on the receiving end of this at times, and it's often a consequence of not acknowledging the low mood and the anxiety that I was talking about previously. It's often easier to see irritability in someone else and not recognise it in yourself. So do take a wee bit of time to think that through and see if that's something that you have been experiencing. And I think at the minute it's pretty normal, and I guess we do have to in some way bear with each other during those times. But if it's becoming a wee bit more problematic, if you can, to point it out to someone or just become more aware of it and take it if people are pointing it out to you. Again, dealing with those other emotions that I mentioned, making sure you're exercising or just have someone to offload to can be very helpful. I don't mean to downplay that, because I know for some of you it will be a wee bit more problematic and you're living under circumstances where perhaps people are more irritable than they should be and you feel unsafe. And again, that is a time, especially during these circumstances where it's perhaps more difficult, that you need to reach out to someone and get the help that you need. So hope you'll find those tips and resources helpful. There is another resource, Mind and Soul. It's a Christian organisation who look at ways to manage your mental health from a Christian perspective, as well as looking at the kind of psychological perspective as well. So that website might be useful for some of you too. And thank you for listening.